So Nancy, thank you. Of course, thank you so much for being here with us. I've waited a long time to be able to get you on the podcast because it is a topic that always comes up that I don't have the perfect answers for. And this is that second act career that's so it's make or break for so many people. And I even this week I've been going back and forth on what to call this second act, if you will, career transitions. So many folks that end up being able to retire. I labeled it, I think, what's a terrible name, which is the retirement gray zone, where people retire kind of. And I was thinking, wait, the retirement gray zone kind of sounds dark and gloomy. So what is a better interim step? And I still haven't figured that out, but I don't know if it gets much better than semi-retirement. And that's kind of that you use that word, semi-retirement.
Right. And if I had my way with my publisher, that would have been the name of the book. It would have been the semi-retirement handbook. Because I think most people, some people are interested in earning money. As I said before, for a lot of people, it is not so much about earning money as it is about finding activities that are meaningful, finding purpose, filling their day with things that make them, at the beginning of the day, just really want to jump out of bed.
Yeah, well, it's hard. It's so hard for people to figure that out, and we're going to get to lawyer. In fact, one of my questions for you is, I want to know about a story of a lawyer turned barista or a corporate exec turned into a river guide or some sort of extreme job or extreme change, or maybe just a slight change. And we're going to get to that in a minute. But we ask our Retire Sooner guests, because core pursuits, fits into what you talk about, but they're not necessarily income earning. These are just core pursuits. I call them hobbies on steroids. I just wrote about this in the Atlanta Journal about a couple that we've worked with for many years who ended up in a clarinet band in their retirement and got to play at Carnegie Hall. So this entire story of this boomerang hobby on steroids, a big core pursuit of their life that ended up being really big. It was big in the early years of their life, and then it got really big in retirement. So, but let me start with this. Favorite, and I'll give you some choices here. Either favorite song to sing, Nancy Collamer, or favorite just song in general.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I can't sing to save my life, but I would say in terms of singers, I'm old school. I love James Taylor. I believe we share Carolina in common. So Carolina on my mind, one of my favorite songs.
God bless that. You are a Tar Heel. That's right. You went to University of North Carolina for psychology, right? That's when you got your BA. Unemployment 101. I love that. How about your favorite instrument, either to listen to or to play?
There again, not terribly musical, but I would say in terms of listening to music, there is something just really soothing about a good violin player.
Ooh, a good violin. I thought you were going to say acoustic guitar because of James Taylor, but
yeah.
But I love both. How about your favorite book or the favorite of your books, or have you done another book beyond second or before second act?
Yeah, so Second Act was really my first book. I actually did some ebooks that were really successful. One called The Layoff Survival Guide, back before ebooks were a thing, and it actually did very, very well. But in terms of books that I love, I'd say here again, it's not so much books, but my favorite author in this space, two people I would point to. First is Barbara Sher, Sher. And Richard Leiter, who writes a lot about purpose.
Richard Leiter. Maybe we have them. Maybe we should. Would they be good guests on Retire Sooner podcast?
Well, sadly, Barbara Sher just passed away. But Richard Leiter would be an excellent guest. He's been studying purpose long before it was in vogue. In vogue
to study purpose in life. How about your favorite place to travel? Favorite place to travel in Michigan?
I will have to admit I've never been to Michigan.
Well, that's why we asked the question, because it's an underrated state, and this is emblematic. So if you haven't been, I spent a bunch of time there in the summer because if you go really far north, it's cooler.
Right.
You can kind of get out of the 100-degree heat, and there's not a lot of places to do that. You got to get pretty close to Canada. So how about just favorite place to travel, though, in general or in the world?
Yeah, I have to say one of our all-time favorite vacations was to Acadia National Park in Maine.
In Maine, it is
Yeah.
beautiful. Well, Maine is cooler in the summer. And where do you hail from? So where are you doing this interview from?
Okay, so grew up in Long Island, went to school in North Carolina, lived most of my adult life in Connecticut, and less than 2 years ago, we moved to Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and that's
Bucks
where I
County,
am
PA.
today.
Well, you're basically from near my hometown then. So I'm in, and if you're newer to Pennsylvania, Bucks County is probably an hour from where I grew up. So I'm in the near Lancaster County. I grew up.
Sure.
My dad lives in Coatesville, near Amish country, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So it's a
Nice
beautiful
place.
place.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place. So let's start with the cliffhanger here. And this is where, and I will have these conversations, and once in a while I get a little bit stumped because you have people from all sorts of careers, and they'll come to me, and let's say they've gotten to the point financially where they are in good shape that they can kind of go do something else, and the money's not quite as important, but they still want to earn a living, or they really want to get out of a career and they still want to earn a living. And I've had clients of mine read your book and just say, it was really helpful, the second act careers, because I'm really rethinking that. And so I don't know what to tell people a lot of times if they're going to go consulting, or they're going to in the similar industry, or they're going to go something completely different. It's a real specialty to help someone do that, because there's so many ways you can go, and it's such a big step to change, and it's a really important step for your life, your purpose, and potentially financially. So let's start there. You had mentioned a lawyer, and you actually have a consulting practice where you sit down with people and help them with this potential next step. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah.
So what are the tough ones? Give me an example of a lawyer, and I know lawyers typically want to get out of their careers, but where do they go, and how diverse can the outcomes be when they're leaving?
Yeah, so it's such a great question. And the answer is the outcomes can be extremely diverse, because we're talking about different people with different interests and different goals. And I think one of the biggest challenges for attorneys or anyone who has invested a lot in their career is that when you're talking about working during retirement, or even if you're not talking about working for income, just finding meaningful activities, it can be difficult to replicate the stature and the prestige that you enjoyed in your first career. And that can be a real stumbling block for folks. I'll never forget one time, Wes, I was sitting next to a man on an airplane. We got to chatting. He asked me what I did, which always leads into interesting discussions. And he said to me, my biggest fear is if I leave my job, when I go to a cocktail party, I am going to constantly introduce myself as someone, well, I used to be, fill in the blank. And so that's a real challenge for people. And so how do you get over that? Where do you start? And, the first place that you start is you really need to think about what is it that you love to do, what do you do well, and what do you find most meaningful? And, that sounds really obvious, but doing it is really, really challenging. And so a simple thing that, your listeners can do right now is just take out a piece of paper, draw 3 columns, label the top column, what I love to do. Next one, what do I do well? And third one, what do I find meaningful? And just keep a running log for a week. And it can be things as simple as, I love going to the farmer's market and just spending time picking out fresh fruits and vegetables. I think I'm really, really good at helping people with relationship problems. Keep a running list going. And then at the end of the week, look for, okay, where is the intersection between these 3 columns? And you'll begin to get some ideas. Now, that's a great place to start, but that is only a starting point. And I always say you can really get lost in this if you just use your time to think about it yourself. You can get really caught up in your own limitations, your own past scripts. And so it's really helpful to also ask other people who know you well and say, what do you think that I do well?
Maybe some examples. I mean, you had mentioned you're talking to a lawyer at some point this week, counseling someone. And again, saying lawyer, there's so many different kinds of lawyers, and it's a very broad industry, obviously, with lots of different specialties. But do you see lawyer that goes to barista? Do you see people that are big, high corporate and they go and they're now river guides? Or is that the outlier relative to staying on a similar, let's call it a similar path?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So great question, because, those of us in the media love those types of stories, right? They make for great stories. We all enjoy them. They're very inspirational. Are they the norm? Not really. The fact of the matter is, most people base their second act careers on some part or piece of what they did before, but they do it in very different ways. So as an example, I was speaking with someone the other day. He was someone who had been a high school teacher. He loved teaching, but he was tired of being in the classroom. He's retired now, and what does he do? He found himself a gig at a local historical society where he gets to dress up as a historical character and lead stores. He's having a blast, not earning a whole lot of money, but that's not the point. He just really enjoys doing it. So it's a way of taking a piece of what you did before. I think my favorite story from the book was I interviewed a rabbi, and he had decided for a variety of reasons he wanted to leave pulpit life, and he was trying to figure out what to do next. And he always, people had always said to him he was very funny. And so he happened to see an ad in a local paper the local Jewish paper for Philadelphia's funniest comedian. And he thought, what the heck? I'm going to audition. P.S. He ended up developing a stand-up routine. And where this gets really interesting is he paired up with a Southern Baptist minister and a Muslim cleric. And they developed an act called the Laugh in Peace Tour, where they went around to college campuses, and together they entertained the students. And I love what he said to me, because he said, Nancy, I am no longer on the pulpit, but when I see the students or sitting there, someone with a yarmulke who's sitting next to someone with a hijab, and they're both laughing at the same jokes, and they start conversing with each other, I'm doing God's work. And I love that, because it's such a fun example of how you can take the core of what you did before and express it in different ways.
Well, it sounds like the perfect intersection between something that he loves, so he's speaking publicly, right? And giving a message, and then he's probably really good at it. So what does he do well? And then meaningful, which is the three columns you talked about, is that intersects on all three on this particular example.
Right.
Is there, if you were to, and again, you're so right about these stories. I mean, you go to CNBC Personal Finance Channel, it's usually something kind of extreme. And now I want to also ask about the career where you end up traveling, let's say, but you're blogging about it and you're making a living that way. But what about maybe some less likely where people really do downshift? I mean, do you see people that are high power in some sort of high power attorney or consultant or executive, and then they go into something that is really ultra low pressure? Yeah. And I don't know why I always go back to the barista thing, because I think when we're in Starbucks, we think for 10 minutes, like, oh, that seems like a nice, fun job. Reality, that's a really tough job. Right. And those people are getting hammered by lines and 15 orders. But do you have an example of something that sounds just nice and relaxing as your next move?
Yeah, so I'll give you a really fun example. So Wes, as part of my work, I write a column about work and purpose for Next Avenue, which is a PBS site for people over 50. And
love Next Avenue, yeah.
Yeah, and I interviewed a man who had been a vice president at a company. He had moved to Portland, Maine. And he spent the first couple of months just getting settled. And then he started to grow antsy, and he started thinking, I'd really like to figure out something I can do. So he happened to be at the barber shop. And the barber was talking with the person next to him about how there was this new company in town, Maine Foodie Tours. And his ears perked up, and he thought, That'd be sort of fun. I love good food. I love talking with people. He ended up becoming a part-time guide for Maine foodie tours. He would be out of the house and walking around. So he did that during the summer months. And then, Portland, Maine gets really cold during the winter. And in the winter, he always loved basketball. And the Boston Celtics had a G League team in Portland. And he worked as an usher. And, he loved it. It was really fun. His wife was happy. He was out of the house. He would, be able to talk with people all day, having a great time.
Yeah, that is awesome. That is aspirational. I think it's because I keep thinking the river guide thing, which is something I hadn't really thought about until this past summer. I went whitewater rafting. I would say it's semi-whitewater rafting. It's like semi-retirement. It wasn't crazy rapids with my kids, and it was in Colorado, and it was really wonderful. And I thought, what a relaxing, fun, totally different thing that relative to what I do on a daily basis, which is finance and economics and investments and financial media. And I just thought, what a radical shift to something totally different. And I think that a lot of us have in our mind just the thought of how nice it would be to have a radical shift. Oh, farm and ranch in Montana. Like, I'm going to be a cowhand, like totally different. But the reality, and let's go back to kind of for most people to try to educate and help our audience to what most people do is that they end up with something that is in a similar vein to their industry, but maybe something doing it in a different way. And you talk about expert streams of income. And maybe let's go to that, which may go back to this thought around consulting, which is kind of the number one thing I hear. Oh, I'd like to do some consulting, but it's not as easy as a lot of people think it will be. So let's go down that trail.
Sure. So lots of people who leave their professional life, and they say, and rightly so, basically I enjoyed my job, but either it was time to go or they got pushed out or what have you. But they have all of this knowledge and expertise that they don't want to let it go to waste. And so what are some options for people like that? Well, as you said, consulting is the obvious low-hanging fruit. You can figure out some way to teach, either as an adjunct professor. Again, you're not going to get paid a whole lot. But I was talking with someone the other day. He's getting ready to retire. He's leaving his position he's in the C-suite in a hospital. He knows a lot about how hospitals are run. He said, it'd be really fun just to teach a course at the local community college on that and share my expertise. I was talking with someone else who I'm sure you're familiar with, SCORE. SCORE provides mentoring and educational services to people that are interested in entrepreneurship. I have a friend who ran a company. He was very, very successful. He now spends some of his time mentoring other entrepreneurs and sharing his knowledge that way. So there's lots of different ways that you can do it. You might be a business consultant. You can obviously write. You can speak. You can sponsor lectures. These days online, there are a lot of different platforms where you can even create your own course or your own digital products. Now, I do have to say, most of the people who are hawking those platforms and those digital products make it sound like it's super easy to do, and all you need to do is, it'll take you 3 hours and you'll have a successful product. You and I both know that the marketing that goes into those takes a whole lot more time and effort than most people are willing to admit. But that can be an option for some folks.
And by the way, the example that you gave was SCORE, which is SCORE, which is the entrepreneurship
yes,
organization.
That's through the U.S. Small Business
Administration.
But if you look up score.org.
Score.org for those listening and looking into that. And again, you're right. There are new online platforms. Now, Masterclass, which I used to see ads for Masterclass. Now it almost looks like you have to be an A-list celebrity to do that one.
Yes.
But there are others that you don't have to be, Oprah Winfrey to get a gig there.
All sorts.
Teachable is another example.
Yeah,
Teachable.
Thinkific, lots of different ones.
When do we start, right? When do people really start? Should they start? And when do they start? Is there a mistake in people waiting too long or doing too early? And do they need to be financially ready? Is that part of the equation when you're counseling people on these second act careers?
Yeah. So my standard answer to this one, Wes, is it is never too early or too late to start. Let's talk about what that means in terms of real time frames, though. Ideally, I think if you're within 2 years of retiring, that's sort of the sweet spot to begin to think about this. And if you are already retired, then, for a lot, look, a lot of people are really busy with their jobs. They have busy lives. They just don't have the bandwidth to really address this. So if that's your situation, that's okay. Take a couple of months to decompress, enjoy life, and then begin to really think about this in earnest.
So the sweet spot within around 2 years prior to
Yeah.
either your actual retirement or your semi-retirement. How long do you see people on average end up in these second act careers? How long do they last?
Great question. I don't have a good answer for that. What I can tell you is that I think they are oftentimes works in progress. So people start out doing one thing and then one thing leads to another. And, I think that point is really important for people to remember that you're never going to get anywhere by just thinking about this in your head, that it's important to start to take steps. So take a class, maybe take on a project, begin to test things out in small ways, do a volunteer gig. That type of activity will give you lots of information, and that will then inform your next steps. Wes, I'm sure when you started out as a financial planner, you did not have in mind, hey, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to have a podcast, I'm going to write columns. That was probably not part of your grand vision at the beginning. But as you got into it, you began to see opportunities that you didn't know existed before. And the same is true with the second acts.
A little similar to how you ended up in this second career, because you were in HR for a long time. And then how did you transition? How long did that take? And what did that end up just happening? And then you looked back and said, wow, I went through a second act, and then now I can help people do that. Or did you have that? Did you have a grand plan when you were ready to do your second act?
Yeah. So the answer would be no. And what happened in my case is, I was a psychology major in college, had a grand old time at Carolina, but, graduated not knowing what the heck I wanted to do. Ended up working for AT&T, back when it was AT&T, in their management training program. And, 2 years of that, finally I said, okay, I need to get my act together. And I happened to work for them. I mean, talk about the role serendipity plays. I happened to work for them right at the point AT&T was breaking up. And so the company brought in career counselors. And I spent 2 days working with career counselors. And I thought, wow, what they do? I didn't even know what career counselors did. That seems really interesting to me. Fast forward a couple of years after I'd had my first child, and I did take off a little bit of time. And I thought, I think that would be really interesting. And so I looked online. I ended up finding a master's program in career development. Went and got my master's degree, spent the first 15 years or so of my practice working with moms who wanted to work on a flexible basis. And I did coaching and writing around that issue. And then when my own kids had grown up and were, out on their own, I thought, well, I don't want to be, 70 and in a rocking chair and talking about jobs and moms. And what I realized was so many of my contemporaries were beginning to wonder, what am I going to do during this so-called retirement time? And I thought, you know what? I've learned a lot from my work with moms about flexible and fulfilling options. And I bet this population would be interested in that as well. And that was how the idea for the book came along. So it was a series of steps. And did I know that going into it? Absolutely not. But each step really became visible to me as I got into the process.
So you were at University of North Carolina. That was undergrad. So you're running around Franklin Street, having a good time, and he's not here. And that was there, of course, right? He's not, right? Do you know what I'm?
Yep.
Of course. And then I don't know if I knew that there is a master's in career development. So that's after University of North Carolina. You went to New Rochelle, College of New Rochelle, and so there's an actual major called career development or master's program.
Right. So again, serendipity played a role because at the time there were only 3 master's programs, and this was before the days of virtual learning. One of them happened to be a half an hour from my house at a point that I had two very young children at home. And so, I was not going to go travel into Manhattan and go to, NYU, which eventually also got a program. But at the time, I just, it was a fortuitous happening.
Now, what about the fears? So we go through, and I'm wondering who your clients that you counsel on this, what they articulate their biggest fears. Is it financial? Is it, I'm not going to be good at this next gig? I'm not going to find, I think what I would, in my mind, something that is a little ominous is just, am I going to find something that I really like? And then when I dive into it, so what do you see as kind of this list of top fears that we need to overcome?
Yeah, so, you just hit upon some of them. And I think, the fear of not finding something as good as what they did before is a big fear among a certain demographic. The financial fear is not so much among my clients. I tend to work with fairly high-level executives. But in my day-to-day, I get on my website, people sign up for my newsletter. And when people sign up for my newsletter, I say to them, hey, if you're willing, can you let me know why you're interested in this topic? So I hear from a lot of people around the country. And so the financial aspect of this dynamic is very real. We're living right now in a situation where we have said to people, hey, you worked for 30 years and now you're going to be retired for 30 years. And by the way, you should earn enough in that first 30 years to fund that second 30 years. It's not realistic for a lot of people. So people say, how am I going to find something to do that is going to be fun and fulfilling and flexible at the same time that I need to earn some money? So it's an interesting and oftentimes very, quite honestly, was very, very challenging dynamic.
Yeah, it's almost so. But now you've also said you've got a teacher, with maybe not super high income, but then they do typically have good retirements because they might have pensions. But it's almost as though the theme here is using your skills, lower pay, lower stress, but more fun and more fulfillment is right. Almost the perfect semi-retirement second act.
Right. And in terms of the finances, and I'm sure you know this better than I do, one of the great things about having a second act career is if you can find something that is enjoyable and that brings in some additional income, what it means is that you might be able to delay tapping your savings and filing for Social Security, and you can put that off for a couple of years. And so the additional income, even if it's not that much, can make a real difference down the road in terms of you not having to draw down your savings earlier than is advisable. And that can make a big difference for folks.
It is such a practical piece of the equation, right? So I've written a couple different books about happy retirees. The first one was You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think, which was a study on happy retirees and their habits, both lifestyle and then financial. And financially, you can kind of sum it up as getting to, and again, these are checkpoints, and you could adjust these numbers maybe a little higher for inflation, but getting to $500,000 in liquid retirement savings, having multiple streams of income, and that's exactly where you come in here, whereas you may have rental income, you may have portfolio income, but you may have part-time work or hobby income. I see a lot of happy retirees end up doing a hobby job, and I've kept a long list over the years of different hobby jobs that kind of really blossomed from what I saw through social media, because the average person could be able to at least market their hobby job a little easier than before social media. And then really getting to know mortgage, right? Or mortgage payoff within sight. There's a dynamic that I've found in my research over the years is as years to pay off mortgage go down, happiness levels go up. Right. And it's an interesting dynamic of just getting rid of that big financial burden that you're paying a mortgage every month. The closer we get to that light at the end of the tunnel, the more financial peace we tend to find. And then that maybe gives us more flexibility to do our second act. So now you were doing this, a lot's happened, right, in the last 5 years, really the last 3 years due to COVID. But way before that, years before that, Nancy, you were advocating flexible work. So, and I don't know if that felt like pulling teeth back then. Now it's probably, it is how we live. We live with flexibility.
Right.
We may never be doing this interview if it weren't for just the advent of the technology that we use to be able to do these great podcasts and have great audio. And you're in Bucks County and I'm in Atlanta. That is almost one of the silver linings from COVID. But let's talk about this pre-COVID world. How unflexible was the world when it came to travel and where you were physically versus today?
Absolutely. And I think you bring up such an important point here, Wes, because I believe that now is the best time for people that are interested in flexible work. So one of the big changes that happened and was really accelerated by the pandemic was the adaptation of virtual services for all types of businesses. So let me give you a couple of examples. I have a friend of mine who she is a lactation consultant. She helps new moms with breastfeeding. Pandemic happened and she thought, oh my God, now what? I can't, there goes my business. I can't help women. Exactly the opposite happened. People still needed her services. She discovered, Zoom, she could do it by Zoom. It meant that she could take on many more clients than she had before, and she qualified for telehealth reimbursement under insurance. So her business took off during the pandemic, and that was something that was not possible for her to do before the pandemic. I know personally with my retirement clients, pre-pandemic, when I said to them, would you like to meet via Zoom? They would say to me, what's Zoom? And, the reaction was, no way. Now, absolutely no one questions it. So I'm able to, I'm going to hop off this call. My next client today will be somebody who's in DC. I'm able to do it that way. Give you just one more example. Another colleague of mine, and she's a stylist, and she helps people with, picking out special occasion clothes and redoing their wardrobe. Same thing with her. Pandemic hit. She thought, I'm done. This is not going to happen. Exact opposite happened. She discovered ways to share her services online. She now uses online shopping sites, has vastly expanded her service. So, just three very brief examples. And this plays across all different types of professions, that people are able to do it virtually. And particularly for older people, what it means is that, the woman who is the lactation consultant, she doesn't have to worry about getting in a car in a snowstorm. She can do this wherever. For moms, if they have a sick child at home, they can take an hour here or an hour there to work with clients. So it has really opened up possibilities that didn't exist.
Nancy's already given us I've been keeping a little running list here. We've got stylists. These are second act careers. Stylists, multiple forms of teaching, lactation consultant, which I never would have come up with, a comedy routine. Again, I never would have thought of that one either. Career coaching, which is something that you do, all sorts of consulting. You talk about a reinvention R&D budget. I want you to maybe just dive into that a little bit. It sounds like something our listeners, if you're thinking about these second acts, should really consider doing. Reinvention R&D budget. What is this?
Yeah. So here's the thing, Wes. I am constantly amazed when I went around talking about my book, Second Act Careers, and I would hear from people who would say, well, some of these ideas sound intriguing, but, I just don't want to spend the money to get a certificate or to take a class. And finally, I started looking at them and I would say, if you don't mind me asking, what did you spend on your child's viola lessons? And are they still playing viola? What did you spend on your child's ice skating lessons? And did they go to the Olympics? The point here being that we spend particularly, and women are particularly bad at this, we spend all sorts of money on our kids and other people. But when it comes to ourselves, and particularly at this stage in life, some people feel like, okay, well, it's not that important. I'm older. I should be able to figure this out on my own. I don't want to spend any money on classes or, spend money on putting up a website. And my feeling is, first of all, there's a lot of things these days that are available for free, classes and website templates and all sorts of things, and listening to podcasts like this where you can get educated. A lot of this is available for free, but every once in a while, it really does pay to spend some money. And so, another great example from my book is I interviewed a woman who's a senior move manager. Senior move managers are people who help people move out of their forever homes into the next facility. So it might be a 55 plus community, an assisted living facility, what have you. And they help them with, decluttering, planning the move, figuring out where the furniture goes, etc. It's a growing field, as you can imagine. This woman, the way that she got into the field, sort of a longer story, but
hold on, is this her primary or her second act? So senior
it became her second act.
Second act.
She was actually somebody who did PR for the financial services industry. This, you have to remember, I wrote the book back following the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. So her financial consulting business at that point was not doing so well, and she needed to figure out something else that she could do. She read about the senior move manager. She thought, that's intriguing. She went to their annual conference, so she immersed herself in 5 days of learning and meeting new people, and that was such a fabulous way. I really encourage people to take a look at industry associations. There is an industry association for every industry you can possibly think of. And a lot of them offer training programs and a network of people that you can tap into to help with moving forward in your next act. The funny thing about the story, Wes, is that she became a senior move manager, but when she went back the second year to the conference, they discovered that she had all this background in PR. So all of these senior move managers were interested in speaking with her about helping them with PR for their business, and then she started doing that as well. So it's a great example
evolution.
Of a full circle. Right.
Yeah, it's this evolution of, again, taking something that you're already good at, moving into something that you enjoy, that gives you this meaning that you're good at, and then it continues to evolve. And it evolves back to, wait a minute, I'm now in a new career, but I can bring in the skills, my expert income streams, as part of how you categorize this, pull that back in, and then it continues to evolve and blossom over time. And I think it goes back to the thought here, Nancy, that people need an R&D budget. They need to say, look, it's okay to spend some time and some money and some energy to reinvent and to reinvigorate and to see if you can get excited about something. I really,
that's right.
And it's a wonderful point to remember is that there is an industry association for pretty much everything out there. And anything that's ever done well economically, in some sort of, which means there's a chance that you're going to be able to make at least some money, and there's an industry for it. There's an industry association for it as well, and I think that's a really practical piece of advice that our
right.
folks can use.
And as I said, and a lot of those industry associations offer classes and webinars for people that are interested in it. And Wes, the main point about the R&D budget is it's like any other item in life. If you say at the beginning on January 1st, if you say, okay, I'm allocating $500 towards my second act education and development, you will be far more likely to spend that when you see the opportunity to take a class or to go to a conference than if you have to scramble later on and figure out, which bucket you're going to pull that money from. And just by setting it aside ahead of time, you're giving yourself permission to go ahead and use it. And I think that that's a really valuable step to take.
How about when it comes to this Reinvention R&D budget, there's also the allocation of time. And I know that you've mentioned volunteering as a way to figure this out or get going on a second career. So I guess that kind of goes, so volunteering is another piece of the equation in your R&D budget. It may not cost you anything, but it's an investment of time to see if you like a particular area of the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And another way that I think is a great way to test out your interest in new pursuits is take advantage of some of the platforms that are out there, the gig platforms that are out there. I mean, everyone's familiar with, Uber and Lyft, But there are gig platforms for every type of pursuit that you can think of. If you're interested in freelance writing or freelance photography or freelance cooking, there are gig sites that you can connect with that will make it very easy for you to establish a presence online. So as an example, I interviewed a gentleman one time who he had been a vice president of a company. He had retired. He was trying to figure out what to do next. His passion was he loved dogs. He loved dogs and he loved taking long walks in nature. And he thought, might be fun to be a dog walker. But he was someone who was not entrepreneurial. So what he did was he went on rover.com. He set up a profile. And so Rover, you just put in some information, you get your profile on the site, and business started to come in. Now, obviously, these platforms take a percentage of the money that comes in. So longer term, you're probably going to want to go out on your own. But in the short term, it can be a terrific low risk way to test out your interests, see if there's a market, see if you like it, and then you decide, does the reality match up to my vision of what's possible?
So rover.com is the Uber for dog walkers.
Yep.
So
or cat sitters.
Or cat sitters. You just mentioned, several more things. Freelance writing, cooking, photography, whether you're taking care of animals, whether you're boarding and helping people with dogs that you're headed out of town, or dog walking or dog sitting. It's the more we talk, the brighter the light gets to me of just how many opportunities there are. And when you're staring at this as a consultant who's doing technology, let's say for the travel industry, you're sitting there saying, well, what am I going to do next? Like there's so many ways to go. And it feels like what you're trying to help people do here as our listeners is just break down these walls of, it's not nearly as complicated, nearly as high of a hurdle that you might think to find the next act. Now, speaking of, what if you end up starting something and you go head first and it doesn't work, it doesn't fulfill? How often does that happen? And you see people that really regret their first, second act step.
Yeah, it happens a lot. So let's talk about that. And this is why I always say you take the smallest step and you take lots of them and you test out different things, because you don't want to invest. And that's why, using the example of Rover, that's a really easy way to test out your interest in dog walking versus starting your whole dog walking business and having to find out, what do I do about filing with the local town and getting licenses and insurance and all the rest of it. They'll handle that for you. So that's a simple way to do it. So I am a great believer in you fail fast, you fail often, and that is going to inform your next steps and get you much quicker to where you want to be.
How about life story worksheets, something that you write about? Can you kind of just explain that? Or is that similar to what you talked about earlier about love, something you love, something you're good at, and something that's meaningful? Tell me about these life story worksheets.
Yeah, so I have those in the book. And the reason I do that those come out of my, career counseling background, is one of the big challenges, Wes, is that once you are of a certain age, it's hard enough to find your keys in the morning, let alone remember what you did when you were 17 and whether or not you enjoyed it. So with the life story worksheets, what I do is I have worksheets where I divide it into different sections. So childhood, your college years, your working years, your personal life. And then I ask people key questions to just stimulate their memory and write it down. And people are always amazed when they go through this process. It is, it's a little time consuming. It's your life that you're talking about. How things come back to them that they had completely forgotten about. And once they write it down, they begin to really see real common threads between their experience as to what they love, what they enjoy doing, and what they value. And so this is really the house cleaning part of it, if you will, of, it's sort of like taking inventory. It's the Marie Kondo, just get rid of what doesn't spark joy. And In order to do that, though, first you got to open the drawers and see what's there. And so it's important to go through that process and get it down on paper, because otherwise you're trying to figure it all out just thinking about it, and you're going to miss a lot of key points.
So I made a quick life story worksheet. And again, there's a lot more to this, but I go childhood, college, and working career, Nancy. Childhood, I'm thinking mucking stalls. So cleaning out stalls for horses, one of the main memories I have. Landscaping, another main memory. This is all childhood, early teens into teens. Camp counselor. And in two of those, I ended up with an actual business. So I started a camp, and then I had a landscaping business. But when I was mucking stalls, I was just mucking stalls. So then college, I did construction, and I had a house painting business in Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
I did one of those college painting businesses. Now, I can just tell you, that is not something I'm trying to revisit, but I could always go back and paint houses. Chapel Hill in the summer, painting houses, that was very memorable. Of something I don't want to necessarily go back and do, even though it was very fulfilling and it was fun. And then working career, again, investments, and then private equity and media and writing. So those are all the things that I love to do in my working career. So if I were your client, you would tell me, Wes, what would you tell me my second act is, Nancy?
I wouldn't even dare guess it off of that list. And I think that's a really important point. Is, everybody wants to be able to take the test. And this is why assessment tests do so well. Let me just take the Myers-Briggs and then I'm going to know what to do. Or let me take the, strong interest inventory and I'm going to know what to do. And I can tell you, having a master's in career development, that, they're great for the test manufacturers, are not so great for the individuals. Because the fact of the matter is what you should do next is partly based on your skills and your interests and your gifts, but it also has to, and your values and all of those good things. But it also has to do with, where are you today in your life? What are you looking for? And we haven't talked a lot about that. But what are you looking for in terms of your lifestyle? What's most important to you?
Well, you're also saying, Wes, hey, buddy, patience and time and activity, which is a lot like investing, by the way. But let's Nancy, let's talk about that. You mentioned, let's talk about what really fits your life. I think I don't know if you're headed towards fulfillment here, but tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I think there's both sort of the inner fulfillment, and then there is just the practicalities of your situation, particularly when you get to retirement. So, the practicalities of your situation may be that your spouse recently retired and your spouse is really interested in doing a lot of traveling. That's going to impact your plans. The practicality may be that you have elderly parents who need your time and attention, or, a spouse who needs caretaking. You may have health issues. There are a lot of practical issues that could potentially influence how much time and space you have to devote to different activities. So, like I said, part of it is logistics and practical things, and part of it is what's inside of you. Where are you? What do you want your life to look like going forward? What do you want? Is this more about legacy? For some people, it's really about creating legacy at this stage in life. I really want to do something that's meaningful, that when my grandparents read about me, they're going to be really proud of who I am and what I stood for. That's really important to people. I've had other people who say to me, you know what, I've been a nurse all my career. I have, given so much of myself. And really what I want right now is I want to enjoy my life. So everyone comes at this from very different angles. And the last point, Wes, is that it is a moving target. What works for you between years 60 and 65 might be very different when it's between 65 and 70. And so the important thing is to get in touch with what's important to you when you really feel like you are valued, when you feel like you add value, what you're looking for, what you're good at, all of that, use that as a starting point. Keep that in mind, but revisit it on an annual basis. What's changed? What have I learned? What does this mean for the future?
How about so let's go back to a fantasy second act that you would read about on a financial website that would catch your attention. Let's say mom quits job and travels the world and makes $10,000 a month. I read these stories, but can we talk about something that has to do with the economy that is, let's say, the digital economy, where you might be able to travel and then you're able to make that into a real living? Is that practical, or is that really reserved for just a handful of folks that are continue to market to our unrealistic aspirations, or is that possible?
So in the book, I have a chapter called Get Paid to Travel. And I start off the chapter by saying that you're forgiven if you ignored everything else and came to this chapter first, because I understand a lot of people probably will do that. And right off the bat, what I say is the opportunities to get paid to travel are limited, but there are plentiful opportunities to reduce the costs of travel. And I think this is really a key point. So you're absolutely right. The people who are the travel bloggers, and some of them have done very, very well. There's some people out there that are doing a great job with that, and it's worked well for them. I don't think that that's feasible for a lot of people, though. I think for other people, there are opportunities to travel that will help to minimize the amount of money that you need to spend on travel. So as an example, for the book, I interviewed some people that are in-sitters. What are in-sitters? As opposed to somebody who owns a bed and breakfast, in-sitters are people who, and again, there's a training program for this, who go and relieve innkeepers of their duties for a week or a weekend at a time. And so it's a great way to indulge that fantasy of owning your own bed and breakfast. But you do the work for, a weekend or a week, and then you go back to your nice, quiet home. That's an example. I remember, Wes, you don't want to run into me on vacation because I inevitably start chatting with people about how they got into what they're doing. And when we were out in Yellowstone, there was a woman who gave us a wonderful tour of the Yellowstone Inn. So, of course, I started asking her how she ended up doing this. Both she and her husband were former teachers. They go to work in the national parks each summer for, I believe it's 3 or 4 months at a time, and they give tours. And she said, you know what, this is so much fun. I'm still teaching, but now I have people who are really interested in what I have to say as opposed to the middle school students. And so, people often think about the national parks, working in the national parks as college students, right? Well, the fact of the matter is when does Carolina start? Beginning of August. College students have to be back before the summer is over, and the national parks are open from like May to October. So if you go to the national parks in September, you will see a lot of gray-haired people working in all sorts of capacities, and that's a wonderful way to spend a couple of months. I've interviewed several people who have done that, and to a person, they all say it was an incredible experience. In fact, I keep saying to my husband, that's the one idea that I would actually like to really try.
Oh, that's your fantasy second act. Is it an in-sitter or working in one of the parks?
Yeah, I'd love to work in one of the parks. I think national parks are such a gift to this country, and the idea of working out there now. What goes along with that is I don't have maintenance skills or anything like that, so I'll probably end up being the person in the gift shop or whatever. But that's fine.
That sounds fun to me. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Did you say that they were running an inn as well? Did you say the Yellowstone Inn?
So, no, they were giving tours of the Yellowstone Inn. They're hired by the Parks Department to give tours. And so she did the Yellowstone Inn, and her husband, who's also a retired school teacher, he was giving tours on the property outside.
Oh, she was giving tours inside Yellowstone. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so that's a fun fantasy thought around going west, going to Montana, Wyoming, one of the great Western states, and going to the national parks. That really sounds fun. So maybe you've piqued my second, third, fourth act thought here. Maybe that's the next book. When you update, it's second and third act careers, 50 plus ways. Second and third acts. I immediately think of, so this is just there's so many great things here. And I love, and I think that now that we've talked, it feels as though it's possible, and it's a process though, right? And just like you had said, Wes, it's not as easy as listing out your 3 different life periods of time and what you did. It's going to take some time, because when I get that question from a family I work with, and that we're doing retirement planning, and they have gone many years in accumulating, and now they're ready to go into the semi-retirement phase or full, they want an answer. It's like, Wes, what do you think I should do? What's the next way I can make a little bit of income? And it's very much, it really is that the human reaction is to just get an answer. Like, oh, what would be a good second thing for me to do? And the thought now, I think what I've learned from today is that it's silly for me to be able to say, well, Jim, you should just go do this. Like that doesn't make any sense. It's, Jim, you should start the process of figuring out what your second act should be. You should do a Reinvention R&D budget. You should do a life story worksheet. You should think about this for the next year. You should write down these 3 columns of love, what you love, what you're good at, and what is meaningful. And then you will arrive at your second career, as opposed to, hey, let's just play darts and say, boom, I want to choose that. Like you've really come at this in a much more comprehensive way.
And what I would say is, doing all of that self-analysis and introspection is super important. But equally important is then you've got to get out and begin to test some of these ideas out, because oftentimes the reality and the vision don't sync up. So it is indeed a process. And the last thing I would add to that, Wes, is before you asked about when do you start the ball rolling, and something that's really simple that every listener, no matter where you're at in this process, can start today, is just sign up for some of the newsletters of sites that feature these stories. I think as you begin to get familiar with some of these stories, I shared some of them today. Obviously, my book has them. But I pay attention to this space. So I know every week there are stories like this that get published, or there are podcasts that focus on this. And so if you go to my website, I have a list of 100 plus great second act career resources. And in there, I recommend some of the places where you can do that, in addition to my own newsletter, where twice a month I send people just 5 quick stories, which contain either inspirational stories or resources or ideas that can help people with this journey, because it is a journey and it does take time.
Is that mylifestylecareer.com? Can you tell us where people will find you?
Yes. Yep. So at mylifestylecareer.com. And then, as I mentioned before, I also write about work and purpose for nextavenue.org.
And if somebody really wants coaching on this beyond doing themselves, can I send them to you? Is this something you are readily taking folks on, or are you overwhelmed with clients?
So as I mentioned before, these days what I do is more retirement coaching. It tends to be people that are not necessarily driven to find work options. It's more about creating meaningful activities. And again, if you go to the website and just click on the retirement coaching, people can read about it and determine if they're a good fit from that.
But this is so rich today, so rich in content. There's so many actionable things people can do that you've talked about. And there's so many different levels of doing this, right? You can do it yourself. There's some self work you can do here. You can take it to the next level and sign up for some of the resources that you have on your website. You can take it to all the way to the level where you actually are paying somebody to do hourly coaching, right? So you can also, there's a lot of levels of figuring out your second act career. And it's just such a good resource. It's such a powerful resource that you help people with. And by the way, are there a lot of other people that do this type of coaching? Is a big industry, or is?
Yeah, so there are, it's interesting because you have people who are career coaches who are really helping people more with the, traditional job market, whatever that means these days. And then there are people who are retirement coaches who really focus more on people who are not interested in working. I sort of cross both of those worlds, just given my background.
Yeah, well, Nancy Collamer, the author of Second Act Careers, 50 plus ways to profit from your passions during semi-retirement, and a writer for the PBS site, which I love, nextavenue.org, and then just Nancy Collamer herself, who's also a coach that does this and a counselor that does this. So, and a Tar Heel, which is another reason why we love you so much here on the show. So listen, thank you so much, Nancy. Wonderful, wonderful information. And I look forward to our listeners to be able to use you as a resource and really dig into what is a process, and not just a quick answer from a test, but a process to find out that second act and maybe a third and a fourth. So thank you, and God bless you for what you do.
Thanks so much, Wes. Appreciate the opportunity.